Hey everyone, it is another Thursday night here at Sober Nation Live. What is going on? Hope everybody is doing well. I'm really excited about tonight's guest. Is somebody that I've known since like 2012, 2014, for a while now. Somebody that I have a lot of respect for. His name is Michael Herbert, and I actually met him when I was working at a treatment center in the marketing department. And he is a great clinician. He came highly recommended when I met him, and I've had the privilege of, being friends with him, and he's just somebody that you always go to for advice. I mean, after a while, he'll start charging you, but I mean, he's just someone that I just been so proud to have on my corner. And I just know that if I ever need him, he's always there. But the reason why he's on tonight is because he's done so much work with families. And again, he doesn't work for one treatment center. He's one of those people that's always sought after, and, different treatment centers reach out to him to come and work for them and work with different populations within that treatment center. So officially, he's an addictions counselor who provides coaching and intervention services, but his specialty is working with families. Michael, welcome. Thank you so, so much for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Veronica. And actually, we met in 2013.
Was it 13?
Yeah,
okay, good. Thank you. I like knowing how long I've known someone so that I can like brag about it. Like, I've known you for a decade, and so I'm glad you knew that.
And I've heard you were the queen of social media. So,
I just do what I can. I'm not gonna own that just yet. It's my hangups and my diagnosis and all that stuff. So I'm not gonna own that just yet. But I happen to show up here, and Tori shows up here every Thursday, and we discuss a different topic. I don't know if you're familiar with the show, but like every week we discuss a different topic that's relevant to Sober Nation, to the community. This is a tight community who, is not only obviously invested in their recovery, but they want to continue to learn more about, how to up level their recovery. So, hi everybody tuning in. Let me just say hello real quick. Hi, Rebecca. Hi, Nick. Hi, Chuck. Hi, Samuel. We have regulars, which is crazy to think about because we just sort of started doing this, again, a service work, and the fact that people show up still blows our minds. So without further ado, we decided tonight that we talk about families, and it's a topic that, what's weird is that like we're almost a year old doing this show, and we haven't talked enough about families, and it's probably one of the biggest, barriers, topics. I mean, I don't even know what the appropriate thing is to call it, but families are just obviously so important, no matter what end of the addiction we're in. And as I stated before, unfortunately, addiction is not, a solo sport. Everybody gets to play, whether you are the one in active addiction or you have a loved one who is in active addiction, there's no escaping it. You're going to feel the effects of the addiction. So, tell us a little, but before, we get into families and get into like all the questions that I have for you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And you've had an amazing career, and you've worked in so many different continents and done some amazing stuff. So why don't you let the public know a little bit more about you and, where you come from?
Okay. Again, my name is Michael Herbert. I'm from Connecticut, and lived in Connecticut, till I was 19, joined the military. Realized at some point between about 21 and 26 that I had an addiction problem. And I went away to treatment, got some help, and this particular treatment program offered an internship that was 13 months. And that's how I got into the field of addiction at a place called Conifer Park, upstate New York. They had an addiction counseling program, internship for a year. So I signed up for it after I got about 2 years of recovery. And that's where it all started for me. So I officially started paid work was in 1991. And I started out in a therapeutic community, was my first job in New York City. It was Samaritan Village. And I left there after about a year and a half and went on to an outpatient program in Manhattan called Intercare Ltd. I was the first person hired and eventually became the program director, stayed there for about 7 or 8 years, then moved to Florida, worked at a place called Renaissance, which then became Karen Renaissance. And I was there for about 8 years before I decided that I wanted something new, something different. And I packed up my things and I moved to Egypt. And I lived in Egypt for a little over a year and worked as an addiction counselor. So I worked with individuals and families there. I worked at the Mahadi Psychological Center and the Cairo American College, which was a high school, and did some prevention work and some intervention work there. And resumed work with the clinical director of their Ocean Drive program, which is their high-end program. And from there, I've just developed a private practice and do consulting work here and there and everywhere. Right now, one of the projects I'm working on is the Hunter Foundation, which is in New York, and they are providing drug and alcohol services for individuals and prevention. So right now, I own a company called ohmtrust.com, and what we do is we provide long-term services for individuals and families where there's some addiction problems. I also run a few groups. I do a monthly workshop for families, a 3-day workshop, and really just keep myself busy in helping people. I would imagine I've helped well over 100,000 people in my career, and each one of those people have helped other people. So now we're up to millions.
That's amazing. I mean, what an amazing legacy and thing to say. And the fact that, and you travel a lot in your personal life. And I know you've gotten requests from people in, Thailand to come and speak at treatment centers there. So you're like very well sought after and like world renowned. So again, we're so grateful that you're taking the time to join us tonight and to answer our questions. And again, thank you to everybody tuning in and everybody saying hello. I know there's a handful of people who are struggling this evening, specifically with depression. So I think at some point we are going to address maybe some tips that you may have for people who are experiencing mental health symptoms as a result of maybe, getting clean and sober. And, it's the whole, what came first, the chicken or the egg. But, some people did state that they were struggling with depression. So we will get to that soon. But thank you, everybody, for being with us. We do appreciate you as well. So let's get started.
Well, let me just say one thing, Veronica. Sure. I'm glad that you invited me here, and I'm glad to be here, and I want to be here because I really do like what I do. So anytime I'm asked to do something like this, of course I say yes, because it's a part of what I like to do. So thank you for inviting me.
No, anytime. And anytime you don't have anything to do and you want to join us, we're here every Thursday night. And, most of the time we're talking from our own experience. And whenever we have a topic, where we feel we can use, expert guidance, we love having experts join us and, provide further insight into some of the things, have worked for us. But it's always great to have a clinician with tons of experience like yourself join us. So tell us about family and the family dynamic and addiction. I mean, I can't imagine, there's not one case, and I'm sure you can agree, of one person you've treated where the family component isn't a part of it. And it's a shame. And I think like now, we are evolving enough to the point where most programs have a family component and there's more education. I think families are getting really savvy about what, their involvement needs to be. But I also do think that could be cultural as well, because, I know in my culture, families, they don't even really Not that they don't understand what addiction is, but it's just we brush everything under the rug and it's like it's not happening. So it all depends on what culture you're talking about. But at least here in the United States, for the most part, it seems like families are becoming more and more active in the recovery process. And unfortunately, even in the addiction and active addiction, you know, they're doing everything that they can to help save their loved ones. So what are your thoughts on like where we're at with families and, you know, their involvement in this disease?
Well, I got to tell you, I really think we're still way behind in what families need. You know, when you think about a family, and we're talking about everyone in the family, the person with the addiction problem and everybody else. And the term that I like to use instead of a term like codependency, for families, I like to use a term like called secondhand drinking and drugging, which is just like secondhand smoke. So families feel all of the effects of addiction, but they don't use the drugs. The addicts or the people with the addiction problem go away for 30, 60, 90 days, even a year for treatment. And what do families get? A weekend, 3 or 4 days to respond to the tragedy, the crisis that they've been living with for years. So families really have been underserved in this process. So we need to really put more effort into helping families. If it were my world and my way, I'd send families away for 2 months and leave the person with addiction problem back home and see how they fared without the family. And usually when families change, it forces the person with the addiction problem to change. And I'm talking about people with addiction problems that over-rely on their families, who are dependent on their families to kind of get through the day.
Yeah. And we actually even have somebody who's literally in the emergency room right now with their sister, you know, going through some stuff. So, I mean, that just goes to show the wide range of viewers that we have. We have people who are living this as we speak. This isn't some sort of, you know, conversation among people who have recovered. And no, this is real and happening in real time. And we have some community members who are still in the thick of it. And what do you think, you know, what would you say to somebody who's like currently in the emergency room with a loved one who's suffering from addiction? Like, how do they cope? What advice would you have for them in order to carry on and to keep moving forward?
Well, I got to tell you, that's a good time to intervene on the individual when they are in crisis, because they tend to be more willing to follow through on a plan. Once that person leaves the hospital and feels better, they may not get the help that they need. So I would try to get that person to agree to something before they leave the hospital. But I would also want to get some information for myself. Oftentimes what families do is they help the person with the addiction problem get their help, and the family members are exhausted or don't feel the need to get help themselves. They felt like they've done their job by getting their loved one into treatment. And usually the families are the ones who relapse first before the client does in some of their behaviors. So it really is important for families to learn what recovery is for families, rather than spending all their time trying to figure out why the addict or alcoholic uses or doesn't use. I also use the term addict or alcoholic. I am a recovering addict, and I'm not bothered by that term. So I tend to not use terms like substance misuser or some of these newer terms.
Substance use disorder, the updated language.
Yeah, so I don't use those terms, but I certainly am not, hopefully not offending anyone by the terms that I use. This is what I believe addiction is about, people with addiction problems. So some of them are obviously identified as addicts and others are alcoholics.
Yeah, no, and hopefully no one is getting offended, and that's a whole nother topic in and of itself. And I find that, you know, most people within the recovery community are okay with, you know, the label addict, alcoholic. And I know there's a huge push on updating the language because of the research that's shown that people, you know, do better when they're called something different. But that, again, that's a whole nother topic. But thank you for being mindful of that and for saying like, hey, if that's, what you do, hopefully I'm not offending you. So we do appreciate that. And I might have to circle back with you and interview you again about why that doesn't offend you. But do you think that we inherit, we've heard and we've read that if we have parents or uncles or aunts who have had, addiction issues, that we have a predisposition to have addiction ourselves. What are your thoughts on inheriting addiction?
Well, I think there are maybe precursors to addiction. One is use before the age of 15. Another is untreated mental illness. Another is untreated trauma. It also could be cultural. It also could be genetics. So I think there are many ways people come into this addiction world or addiction problems. It's not only genetics. So, and you know what? There's also the other. And there are plenty of people that might say the other is low self-esteem. Or for some people, they have all kinds of different reasons. But I think the 5 that I gave you, those are really good the main reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are really good ones. And I think I checked all of those, by the way.
Yeah.
So, and you know me well enough to know that's true.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions families have about their loved one who's suffering from addiction?
Well, I think one of the misconceptions that families have about treatment is if I send them to treatment, they'll get better. And I'll just leave it to the treatment professionals to fix them. But what we find out is that's not true. We need the whole family involved in the process. And also, my belief is longer term works better than short term. This 28-day model is really made for highly motivated people. The people that I work with are not highly motivated. And they need other strategies, other treatments, and longer term to really address their problem. And I'm not saying that everybody has to remain inpatient long term, but we need to create a continuing care plan.
That's right.
That lasts the long term. So any treatment program you go to is going to give you the lecture on the disease concept. They're going to talk about relapse, and that relapse is reoccurring. People do relapse, but they always, mostly 90%, relapse when they leave treatment. But if there's nothing for people when they leave treatment, the only option for them is to return back into treatment. And what I'd rather do is help somebody with a long-term continuing care plan with relapse prevention in it, where families know what relapse prevention is, the addicted person knows what relapse prevention is, everybody knows everybody else's relapse warning signs and triggers, and we can call people out or challenge people or hold people accountable to recovery when the relapse happens versus waiting for 3, 6, 9 months of continuous use or continued enabling the disease before it's addressed. So if we can do the work over a long period of time, I think the outcomes will be better. No one would expect, or at least I wouldn't expect, a person with an addiction problem to get it the first time. It's just like cigarette smokers. Most people who smoke and have quit and stayed quit attempted it 4, 5, 6 times before it stuck. Same thing with addiction, although nicotine and cigarettes are addiction also. It may take a few tries for it to work. But if we get into a long-term process, I think we're better off.
What does a family do? Because okay, so let's play the tape through, right? So you have someone who's not coming home all the time. You don't know when you're going to get the phone call. You're in constant agony. Finally, they accept treatment. So you're like, okay, they've gone away to treatment. I can kind of breathe again. Treatment doesn't work. They have to go back in for another episode. Those who are lucky enough to have multiple treatment episodes and who can afford to do so. And what is a family to do when you're sort of in this in between and in this holding pattern to see whether or not their loved one gets it? Like, what is a family supposed to be doing throughout this time?
Well, I would say ideally, I would hope that they would have started a long time ago. When they start worrying about a person having an addiction problem, if they can get into their own kind of counseling or therapy then, and maybe involve themselves in a 12-step support group or community-based support group like Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, Families Anonymous, and there are all kinds of other support groups for families in the beginning, not after the person's been to 3 rehabs. What I've also found in families is these self-help programs that families go to the first time, they tend to be turned off for some other reason. And it usually is around their 3rd time that they get it. Oh, this is probably going to be helpful for me. I think I'll continue to go to these meetings. But if the first time that they go, it's not good for them, try it 4 or 5 more times in different places till you find one that fits for you. It is so important that families get the help that they need. It's just like everybody says on the airplane, when the oxygen mask comes down, place it on yourself first before you can help somebody else. And if family members got some help for themselves first, they would be better equipped to work with someone with an addiction problem.
It's just, time and time again, it appears that family members never feel like they have a problem or that they have something to work on. What do you say to the family member that says, there's nothing wrong with me, I don't need help?
Well, if you look at some of their financial statements and you find that these people have spent $250,000 on treatment and they're telling me that they don't need help, they've got headaches, they've got stomach problems, they have their own slips and falls. They've now isolated from their friends because they don't want people asking how Johnny or Mary are doing. And their lives have been changed dramatically. I know families who don't go on vacation because they don't want to be out of the country or somewhere else if their loved one were to relapse or get themselves in trouble. So families' lives are put on hold as they're just waiting for addiction to get better. And I say families move forward, move on, live your life, and start to develop some strategies for yourself to deal with the crisis that is coming.
What do you mean by that, the crisis that's coming?
Well, oftentimes, if a loved one is not fully invested in recovery, the crisis is going to come. It's going to happen again. And we need to be able to deal with these things as they come up and actually move out of a crisis mode into probably a more intellectual response to these situations, be a little bit more practical, but don't rush into doing anything. Family members do have an opportunity to talk things through with other people. The person with the addictions crisis doesn't have to become the family's crisis, but if the family doesn't have support to deal with it, then they go into crisis mode, and that's when they start making mistakes.
Right. They go right into, the crisis themselves. And sometimes, what do you have to say about the people who then becomes their identity? And that's what we've learned sometimes to define as codependency, when we now almost need that person to stay sick in order for us to continue to be who we've now become. Is that a thing? I've heard that time and time again.
I don't really like the term codependency because people are dealing with a crisis and they're doing the very best they can with what they have. Yeah, I know that there's some people take it to an extreme, and those people need a lot of help. So I don't want to label them as sick or crazy. If you have a son, daughter, wife, or husband that looks like they're going to really hurt themselves, it makes sense that you go into action to try to save them, right? But if you're doing it on your own, you're probably going to make mistakes. So nobody needs to jump into this thing on their own. Get some help, get some support, get some guidance, and let's try to do something different. Oftentimes people revert to their old way of thinking because that's the only way of thinking, and that's what makes sense to them. Dealing with addiction, we have to start thinking things differently, where if a person didn't have an addiction problem, you'd respond one way. But if they have addiction problem, you don't respond that same way. If you have two kids, one of them has an addiction problem and one of them doesn't, you know, the one that doesn't might get the car when they graduate from high school. But the one with the addiction problem, you might think giving this person a car is going to kill them or kill somebody else. If they want a car, I'll do a matching plan with them or let them buy their own car.
Right. I don't want to reward their behavior.
If you had two kids that were one was diabetic and the other one wasn't, you wouldn't, just because you give ice cream and cake to one for their birthday, you wouldn't do the same for your diabetic because it would kill them. So you don't want to respond to the person with the addiction problem the same way you would respond to somebody else.
I agree with that, but I mean, isn't there, you know, some sort of risk or liability in knowing that somebody's more likely to drive impaired and as a result hurt someone? So like, I completely agree with you. I think that if we want addiction to be treated as a disease, then we need to treat it as a disease across the board. But then is there an argument to be made like that person is more likely to drive impaired? So then are we then going to feel guilty if that person hurt someone else? So like, where do you draw the line?
Well, I don't want to take responsibility for anybody's addiction problem. You know,
you're so good with boundaries.
Well, you know, I'm not going to take responsibility, and I also am going to hold them accountable for what they do. So I'm probably not going to buy anybody a car with an addiction problem. They can ride the bus, you know, or take Uber. Right. And it's not going to be on my back that I bought them a car. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. You did, because I think that there needs to be that, you know, draw that line in the sand. Very interesting question just came through from Rebecca. Is it codependent? She used a word we don't want to use, but that's
we can use it if you'd like.
The point across. Is it codependent to live with my parents so I don't relapse? My dad is scared if I live alone, I will relapse, so I don't move out. What do you have to say about that scenario? Because
I mean, that's a funny
things there.
Yeah, that's a funny scenario. I don't know if living with your parents keeps you sober. I don't know if that'll keep you clean. It sounds like Rebecca's father might need some help in understanding, maybe setting boundaries. But I wouldn't rule out living at home with your family if it works. But if she's stealing from the family and not following the family's rules or expectations, then maybe it's time to reconsider that living arrangement.
I don't think that's like codependent. Codependent would be like getting something in return or getting some sort of...
Now, if Rebecca is 60 years old and her parents are 90, I'd be concerned about that. But I'm assuming she's a younger person.
Lisa says, so you don't believe in the tough love. Let's see. You don't believe in the tough love then. And how about chaos versus calm? I'm not sure I understand that question. Do you?
Yeah, I don't like the term tough love, but I had a family member who had an addiction problem and they needed help. And I told them, listen, you can spend the night at my house one night. In the morning, you go to rehab. If you don't go to rehab, you're out of my house, and I don't care where you go. So I don't know if that's tough love, or was I being too nice to the person for even letting them stay the night? But I want to live a safe life, and I don't want chaos in my life. I certainly am willing to help people, but I'm not going to give up what I have and my sanity for somebody else. So, I mean, I don't know if tough love is the right word. Tough love is probably the right word for some people.
Yeah.
Personally, I was raised in a kind of a rigid family system where, you know, the only way you got paid is if you worked. So for some people, that's tough love. But for me, it's normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Debbie says accountability is key for both sides. 100% agree. Michael says living with my parents makes me want to use. That can do it too.
Yeah, and accountability, she's absolutely right on both sides. So family members need to be held accountable for their behavior, just like the person with the addiction problem, because we want to look at the family as a whole. So there's no bad guy or bad girl in all of this. You either want to be a part of the problem, or you're going to be a part of the solution.
Love
so
that.
everyone is equal in all of this. And just when families get in recovery, like the addicted person, they all become equals. There's no, person running the show and everybody else follows. Once they get into recovery, they're all equals.
That's so interesting. And I so wish people knew that. Why do you think there is that need to do you think it's like society and the stigma and just the history of like what addiction, why is there the need to make somebody like the one with the problem? Why can't we adopt an attitude of we all have a problem as a family here?
Well, I think there's the stigma
before we get there.
Yeah, it's the stigma that's attached to addiction, because if I had cancer, people wouldn't treat me less than, but there was a time when they did. So I think as the stigma is lessened around addiction, those things will change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
it is a brain disease, and that individual's brain is highly affected because of the substance. So on some level, somebody has to take charge, to move things forward. We're not going to let a person, that's just smoked $200 worth of crack run the show.
Makes sense.
Right?
Lisa just asked a question and I'm only because I sort of wonder the same thing. Why are you okay with the term? Why are you not okay with the term codependent, but okay with the term addict? And not to put you on the spot, but just...
No. I'm okay with the term addict because that's how I identify myself. I don't really have a problem with it. Because I think families are in crisis. And I don't know that if I was a family member in crisis, I'd want to be called a codependent if what I'm doing is trying to address the crisis. And I only have the tools that I have. Once I get some other tools and I learn that I can do things differently, and then maybe I deny using those tools and I keep going back my own way, well, then let's have at it. That person's codependent. But to label every family member who has ever enabled a codependent, I think it's a little harsh.
Fair enough.
It's just like labeling every person who's done drugs, call them an addict.
Which we don't do.
Right. Yeah.
No, that's fair. Thank you for answering that. And again, it wasn't, it was just for conversation's sake.
Hey, listen, I get put on the spot all the time. I don't care. Sometimes I do well with it and sometimes I don't.
I know you can handle it.
Yeah.
And if not, you'd go off on me. So I would just be that. And I would just have to take it in public and in national, Facebook, whatever. Do you think a family actually becomes traumatized and can experience PTSD by having to deal with addiction?
Absolutely. So if I had to Narcan my son, daughter, wife, or husband 3 or 4 times, I thought they were going to die. Of course, I'd be traumatized by that. When you hear stories of what people with addiction problems have to go through, and it's my loved one, of course I'm going to be traumatized. Yeah. There's a lot of trauma going on in addictive households.
Yeah.
On all sides.
Now, do you think is there, so we know that there's, education for families. We know that there's family therapy. We know there's Al-Anon, Nar-Anon. Is there anything to address the trauma?
Well, they can get into therapy, but it's got to be more than reading books and sitting there talking to somebody. People have to go into action, and action is what creates change. So there are a lot of different trauma therapies that people can go to. EMDR is one of the more popular ones and really effective. But family members and people with the addiction problem, there's plenty of really good trauma therapists out there that do all kinds of trauma work to help people. And I think everybody that's been affected by addiction in their family, experiences some level of trauma.
Agreed. Agreed. Now, what about people who can't afford therapy? What do they do?
Well, there are plenty of sliding scale programs and free programs and Catholic Charities, Jewish Family Services, the United Way. They all offer something for people. Yeah. There is always something for people that's for free. So if you can't afford treatment, there is something available for you. You just have to look in your community.
And hope that there's room and that you're not on a waiting list.
Yeah, I hope that there's room and you're not on a waiting list. But there's always people willing to help.
Yeah.
A lot of people in recovery have created, I know there's all kinds of self-help groups for families created by people in recovery, either in recovery from family or recovery from addiction, that are not Nar-Anon, Al-Anon, or Families Anonymous. But each town or each area has some local things to help people, and there are resources.
So let's flip the script a little bit. So let's talk about, the people, the suffering from addiction that, have had to put our families through hell. Like, what are some, because I'm gonna speak from personal experience. When I first got clean and sober, I was like, I did it. I got clean and sober. Everyone, like specifically, my siblings, I was like, this is, you should be like throwing me a parade. Like you should be at least speaking to me. It took me over a year for the sibling to speak to me. And I'm looking back on it, I can totally understand because there was so much resentment and my siblings couldn't believe what I'd done to my mom. And, so what is realistic if there's such thing, because addiction is so complex? What is your advice for someone who is getting clean and sober as far as, having patience with their loved ones and with their family members? Because again, the expectation, at least again from my experience, was, okay, I did it, you guys should be like happy, at least being nice to me. So what would you say about that and the expectations on that end?
Well, I think you have to be realistic, because even in your recovery, I would imagine you got clean and sober and you're feeling great, but you were probably harboring a lot of resentments towards a lot of people. So it's great that you're clean and sober, but there's still a lot of work that you need to do. And families really have to have time to heal. And it wouldn't be expected just because you got clean that they're supposed to be happy about it. You've really hurt these people and you've done it for a long period of time. And oftentimes they don't expect you to stay sober because of the history of relapse. So we want to see consistency over time in your behavior, and then we can start to trust you. And even as a clinician, I look for that in the people that I work with. I want to see consistency over time. And then we got a lot to talk about. But in the beginning, we're going to give you a hand clap, but I really want to see action and continued action. I want to see that individual make new mistakes instead of the same old mistakes. And then I know we're on to something. But we want to hold people accountable. So they do check-ins with the therapist, urine tests, SoberLink. There's all kinds of accountability measures that we can use to help people stay on track.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And we actually want to use everyone that we can, because we really want people to be successful. So we're not, giving people a crutch when we say, we do urine testing and breathalyzers and check-ins and this, that, and the other. We want people to be successful.
Heidi has a really good question. What if you want to heal with family, but they're still using? So that's a great question. What if you kind of, know you need to clean up your act, but you still have family members that are not, on board yet? What do you do?
Well, I don't know, when you say not on board yet, are they not on board to?
Because they're still using, I'm sorry.
To accept that you're in recovery, or they're not on board to stop using themselves?
They're still using.
Well, if people are still using, I hate to be blunt or callous about it, but that's their business. And we can't make somebody stop using, but I can still do my part, or this person, she can still do her part to make wrongs right. Hopefully those family members will follow her example and maybe want what she has. But again, she is powerless over them to make them do anything. But there's nothing wrong with offering help each and every time that you see them, that you're available to help them, or there's places for them to go. So you might leave pamphlets around, phone numbers around that they can discover on their own.
That's great advice. How can family members stop enabling or helping someone continue in their addiction? Like, what are some of your best tips?
Well, one of the things that we can use this term enabling is positive. So we don't want to enable the disease of addiction. What we want to do is enable recovery.
I love that.
How can we enable recovery? What are the things that we can do to enable recovery? So I want to support my loved ones going to their outpatient program and the self-help meetings, and I'm going to go to mine. You know, when we have parties at our house, we're not going to have alcohol and things like that because my loved one's in early recovery. We want to help people modify lifestyles to support recovery. So the business person that's worried about the lunches and the dinners that they have to go to might want to think about having breakfasts with those people that they're doing business with, because at breakfast, we're probably not going to drink. So we're going to stay away from those evening activities and maybe do more morning activities to keep our recovery safe. They always, if they are in a troubled situation, bring somebody with them as a sober support to help them get through that. So there's all kinds of ways that we can enable the recovery process rather than enable the disease of addiction.
So it's sort of like, it's a perfect segue for my next question. Like, what if, you know, you're someone in recovery who has a child or a spouse, you know, in active addiction? Is it the same thing where you're leading by example? But a spouse is tricky because, you know, I know there is the school of thought of like, get out of Dodge before you put your own recovery in danger. If you're, you know, a spouse, I know a child may be a little different because you may live in different places, whatever. But what if it's a spouse and, you know, there's someone in active addiction, and you can say, let's lead by example, but at what point do you somewhat, you know, protect yourself? Like what is the flag that sort of goes up?
Well, you know, that's a tricky situation, because what if that family member who's engaged in addiction is the breadwinner and the other person isn't? That person can't just pack their things and leave. You know, so they have to come up with other strategies to deal with the addiction problem. I don't know that that person can't seek out help, some kind of therapy, counseling. There are week-long retreats. You know, if that person needs to move out of the house and maybe live with a family member till things cool down, that's what they might do. But there still is a risk, because if one of the partners is the breadwinner, they may withhold funds for that other person. Or the fact that that person's living in the house can at times stop them from spending all the money. At least the rent and food get taken care of.
It's tricky.
So it really is a tricky situation. And I think everybody's situation is individual. So I wouldn't want to tell everybody, you got to do this.
Right. You got to leave.
There are many ways to skin a cat.
Yeah.
And so we have to look at strategies and get people to help us in this process.
Now, here's another question for you, because I'm full of them this evening. What if someone has found recovery? We have, you know, someone who is sick and you know, in active addiction, and we have a family doing all the right things, and they're going to therapy, they have their support, they're, you know, enabling recovery, and this person relapse, which may or may not be a part of recovery. There's different opinions on that. What is the best way a family can react to a relapse? What is, again, I hate placing definitives like best way, but what would you say would be a good way to react if there's a relapse and everyone is doing sort of what they're supposed to be doing?
Okay. Well, first of all, I wouldn't say relapse is a part of recovery. Relapse is a part of the disease of addiction. Relapse is not a part of recovery, although people do relapse in recovery, meaning they return to using.
Yeah.
So what can a family do if a person returns to using? Well, a family needs to, hopefully is engaged in their own recovery process. You can set boundaries. You can offer help to the individual to go get help. There's a lot of things that you can do. You don't have to just sit idly and let that person continue to use. You can call me up and ask me, give me your situation, and I'll give you my best answer or lead you to somebody who can give you an answer. But never try to do this alone, because you don't have to. A problem shared is a problem lessened.
One of the things I've always loved about you is that you give it straight. You don't sugarcoat anything. And that's why I love it and fear you at the same time, because I just know I better be ready if I'm taking you my stuff, because you're going to give it to me straight. And
well, I'm on the air now, and I'm being viewed by people who I don't know who's viewing me, so I am being nice to them.
You're being very nice.
I'm not as raw.
Sometimes that's what you need. I don't need, I know at least my disease doesn't need anybody to coddle me. I need to be told, and that's just the kind, my personality.
But some people do need to be nurtured and supported, and do need an easier, softer way. But some people need it right in their face.
Yeah.
And direct, be thrown into reality based on how they've been living.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you know, you're one of those people and that's not your disease talking?
Say the question again.
How do you know you're one of the people who need to be nurtured and that's not just your disease talking, that you are kind of downplaying your situation? Because I would say, of course, there's a side of me that needs nurturing. But my first thought after that would be that's probably your disease talking, because you want to hear the easy way out, or you want to hear the softer version.
Well, oftentimes when you hear people, I want a sponsor who's going to kick my ass, or I want a tough therapist. Some of those people have been beaten up enough in the street and in their addiction, and they really do need somebody that's warm and nurturing and comforting to them. You don't need to get beat up in your therapy or beat up in your recovery by somebody else. And oftentimes people are looking to get a butt kicking to kind of diminish their guilt. And I don't know that really helps in the long run.
That is such a wake-up call.
The truth is, people do need to be loved. And love really is the only thing that conquers this beast of addiction. So, beating somebody up, even if they ask for it, isn't always the answer.
Why do you think we don't deserve love? We think, a lot of us feel, like you just said, I need somebody who's going to kick my butt and whatever. Is that, sort of is the underlying cause? So we almost either don't.
People have affirmed all of these negative ideas about themselves, either through self-affirmation or listening to others. You're a screw up, you screwed this up, you'll never be any good, you're too fat, you're too dumb, you're too lazy, you're too this, that, and the other. And so if that's the truth, I need somebody to beat it out of me, so to speak. And that, I don't think that works. So yelling, screaming at people isn't going to make them any better, although sometimes people need to be shocked into a reality.
That's so, I love that you said that. Thank you. So let's just, wrap this up. Where can people find some free resources for families, besides Al-Anon? Do you know of any other hookups?
Well, I know the United Way also has help. And I can give you a program. I'm looking on my phone now. That's actually in, I have so many people calling me, so it's hard to get to where I want to get to on my phone. That somebody told me about, that's in Greenville, South Carolina. It's Favor Greenville Recovery Benefits for Everyone. So if they go on to favorgreenville.org, they can get some information that would be helpful.
I never thought of United Way as a resource. So thank you for mentioning that. Like, I don't know why I never thought of that being a resource.
And there's NAMI for mental illness. There's
Right.
support groups for people with mental illness. And going to support groups, you can meet other people who have done other things. So there's a wealth of community resources out there that, you know, maybe I should get better at knowing what they are so I can pass it on to people.
Could, yeah.
Yeah.
Now that you say NAMI, and you know, this is off topic, and but again, because I think, you know, it came up for a couple of people who commented. What do you say to people who are dealing now with, you know, mental health symptoms now that they put the drugs down? And, you know, what is your best advice? Is it to seek professional help?
Well, yeah, I would say seek professional help. And what I always tell people in recovery, this is what I think works: ongoing therapy or counseling, self-help, medication if needed. Everybody, after they get out of rehab, needs a complete physical. So you not only need a physical from your medical doctor, but you need a checkup from the neck up. So you need to probably see a psychiatrist to get evaluated for things like anxiety and depression. Also, diet and exercise are very important in recovery. And the last, but this is the one that scares them the most, quit smoking.
Yeah.
Because the brain is affected by nicotine and caffeine just the way it is affected by crack and alcohol. So nicotine and caffeine are kind of self-defeating when a person gets clean. And there's no reason, you know, people come up with this crazy idea, oh, I can't give up everything at once. Yes,
Right.
you can. And one of the reasons why so many people continue to smoke in early recovery and later recovery is because their sponsors smoke and their counselors smoke. And they get that bad advice of don't give up everything at once.
Right.
And most people who don't smoke give up everything at once. So why do the smokers get to continue to smoke?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not good.
Do you think, is there such a thing as like having some clean time and then having symptoms of a mental health disorder after you've been, is there like a delayed reaction?
Absolutely. Because oftentimes people are using drugs to manage their mental illness. So their heroin, crack, alcohol, marijuana are their way of dealing with mental illness, because if those people didn't do that, they might hurt themselves. So drugs and alcohol for some people is what they use to not kill themselves. So I think once a person gets clean and while they're in treatment, they really need a good evaluation. But when they leave, they need to get second opinions. Rehab physicals aren't enough. And sometimes rehab psychiatric evaluations aren't enough because you're not out in the world being stimulated by what's going on in life. So you get out into the world, you see a psychiatrist, you get an evaluation and find out how you're doing mentally and emotionally.
So again, a little bit off topic, but this was a thing, you know, even within the industry, that everyone is bipolar when they get out of treatment. And there was a point in time where everybody was being diagnosed as bipolar because as you're coming off the drugs, even if it's like for a few months, you're coming up and down sort of thing. What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree or disagree?
Oh, I disagree. Just like everybody seems to be under 25 has ADD or ADHD. And that's not true. And people get over-medicated for things that they don't necessarily need to be medicated for. But I'm not a doctor, so I don't give out medical advice.
Right, right. That was a politically correct answer. So where can people find you and connect with you and learn more about you?
Well, you can go to my website, recoveryguide.net, or you can go to ohmtrust.com. And ohmtrust.com is the company that I run with a few other people, where we do long-term care for people. So we do continuing care for up to 5 years.
Is it like case management, or is it more like therapeutic?
It's therapy. Well, it's therapeutic case management. So we use family coaches, addiction coaches, interventionists. We use structured family recovery. We help people and their families get through the first 3 years. So we use physical fitness, we use nutritionists. All of these people work for our company, and we create packages for families that need the help.
So it's like multidisciplinary.
Multidisciplinary team, right. And we do it nationally and internationally. So you don't have to live in the same town that your family lives in for us to help you.
I love that.
We use face-to-face. We use a secure internet connection for families and individuals, and we use telephone. And they are all as effective as each other. The nice thing about using the internet on a secure site is, let's say you have a mother with children. You know, that's 40 minutes to the therapist and 40 minutes coming back. Some parents don't have that kind of time.
Right.
But if they can do it in the comfort of their living room,
right.
Number one, they're going to save time. And then also the clinician gets a sense of how that person is living in real time in those sessions.
Right. So, it's not what they present in the session, but rather their own environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So there's lots of ways, thank God for the internet and thank God for modern technology, that we can help people in ways that we couldn't in the past.
Agreed. I strongly agree. And Tori's in the comment, you guys. Tori, can you add the recoveryguide.net as another resource where they can connect with Michael? That'd be awesome. Thank you for adding ohmtrust.com. Michael, I can't thank you enough. You've been such a good sport. I mean, I asked you stuff that wasn't even, on the list, and I know you didn't even read the list because you freestyle like that, but I so appreciate you taking the time and being willing to answer whatever I threw at you. And I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight.
Hey, can I give you a quick show of my little dog?
Duh, we love dogs.
This is Inez. She's sleeping, and well, I don't know if you can see her.
Yeah.
She's an Azawak. So she's a very rare breed of dog here in the United States. She runs 35 miles an hour. And
okay, question. Do you think pets are just like, how we have like therapeutic animals? Do you think they help with addiction recovery?
I think that they do, but with pets, you have to have responsible owners. So if the individual can't be responsible for a pet, don't get one. So the individual has to be as responsible so you don't get a cat or a dog because your life is falling apart and you expect this dog or cat to fix things for you and you're not feeding it correctly, taking it to vet care. Don't get a pet if you can't afford a pet.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. So
but pets do add to recovery, I believe. Yeah.
I agree. I think so too. Thank you guys for those of you who tuned in. Thank you so much for tuning in real time. For those of you watching the replay, thank you as well. Feel free to leave your questions in the comments, even if it is the replay and we're no longer live. Michael's going to be around, and if you have a question for him, we've dropped the links on where you can reach him. So all of this stuff is available to you. You have no excuse.
Oh, can I give you I have an email if anybody ever wants to email. It's recoveryguide@gmail.com. So if you have any personal questions you want to ask me, any information, you can get it from there. Or you can go to any of the websites and find me there, and there's usually a phone number there too.
Be prepared. You may get some questions now because we do like to ask some questions in this community. So
we have lots of answers.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again. Have an amazing night to everybody watching. Michael, Thank you. I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you, Veronica.
We will see you guys in a week from today. And if you have any ideas for topics, if there's something we haven't discussed, if there's something that you'd love to learn more about, let us know in the comments and we'll see what we can do. Have a good night. Bye.